Today's lesson is on atomic structure. The learning target is I can describe the structure of the atom. So we're starting off with the atom. We should know by now that the model of the atom has changed, but the atom itself has not. What that means is that the atom has been the same, as far as we know, since the dawn of time. We just slowly, over quite some time, have developed technology so that we could have a better understanding or a better visual of the atom. And as we get better equipment, we get better results. One of the major things that we learned about atoms is that, unlike Democritus's idea that they could not be cut, we know that they are made of smaller pieces. Those smaller pieces are called subatomic particles. This sub means under, like a submarine. These particles are under the atomic level. So there's small parts of matter that are inside an atom, and they're inside an atom. First of those subatomic particles is called the proton. The proton is a positively charged subatomic particle. We find it in the nucleus, and because it's in the nucleus, it is contributing to the mass. If you remember the Rutherford model, Rutherford taught us that the atom is mostly empty space with a small, dense, positive nucleus inside. What that dense nucleus means is that if an atom has a mass of 100 atomic mass units, for instance, then those 100 atomic mass units primarily are going to be in the nucleus, surrounded by a bunch of empty space. So that nucleus is very mass dense, very heavy for what it is, because you have a lot of empty space. So your protons are going to be some of your main contributors there. Protons kind of give an atom its identity. It's sort of like DNA. So my DNA says I'm supposed to have bluish green eyes. I'm supposed to be 5'6". If I look at an atom and it has 6 protons, I'm reading its DNA and I can tell you that that is an atom of carbon. DNA is not a chemistry term, that's a biology term, but I'm using it to help you make connections here. We scientists have decided, I don't know who decides, these people are apparently more important than me, but the number of protons in an atom was so important that they gave that number a special name, and they call it the atomic number. So, because carbon has 6 protons, its atomic number is 6. Neutrons are the neutrally charged subatomic particle. We find them in the nucleus, and therefore they are major mass contributors. Their primary purpose is to keep protons from repelling each other. So if you think of a carbon nucleus, carbon would have 6 protons in there. Those protons are all like charges, so they should all be repelling each other. In order to correct that, nature made the neutron to kind of like wiggle in between all of those protons so that they don't repel each other and break all of the atoms. Neutrons, important, definitely not as important as protons. Carbon can have 6, 7, or 8 neutrons. Lots of atoms can have lots of different numbers of neutrons. So because that number varies, we take the number of neutrons plus the number of protons, and that gives us another special number called the mass number. When we learn about isotopes, you'll learn more about mass number. Next comes the electron, which is our negatively charged subatomic particle. And we find those outside of the nucleus in orbitals, shells, rings, clouds. It kind of just depends on the model of the atom that you're talking about. It takes 2,000 electrons to equal the mass of a proton. So because they're so tiny, we ignore the mass they contribute to an atom. It's like you getting on a scale and then putting a tissue in your pocket. You wouldn't necessarily take the tissue out of your pocket if you were going to go get on a scale because you wanted a true reading. The tissue almost virtually doesn't count. We think of electrons the same way. Now, in cutesy terms, electrons kind of tell you the personality of an atom. in technical terms, it tells you how an atom is going to bond or if it will bond at all. So some things love bonding, some things hate bonding, some things love making compounds, other things have very violent reactions, some are very tame. That's going to depend on the number of electrons. I call that its personality. Now, I'll get to that in a second. Hold on. I'm talking to myself. I'm sorry. The nucleus is where all of our protons and neutrons live. That's where the bulk of the mass is. So we went through the 3 subatomic particles. Now we're going over locations of the atom. The nucleus is not a chunk, like it's not like a physical thing. It's just an area where all of my protons and neutrons live. And if I were looking at a lithium atom like this with 3 protons, so its atomic number is 3, that nucleus would look something like this with these protons separated by my neutrons. These neutrons kind of wiggle in so that the protons don't all repel each other. Then we have our clouds or rings, orbitals, shells, energy levels. Again, depends on the model you're talking about. These are going to be where the electrons live, and they are kind of rings, kind of clouds, some cross in the middle. We usually draw it as a Bohr model like this just because it's easy for us to imagine. The rings that are the closest to the nucleus are the smallest because obviously they have the smallest circumference. They are going to hold the fewest number of electrons. Now, I see that it's backwards on this diagram, but I'm going to tell you that the valence shell, or the outermost shell here, that is this shell that this single electron is in all by itself, this has the ability to hold 8. It's just in this case, it's holding 1. That's because this is an atom of lithium. So this valence shell is the very last ring, and it is the true personality of an atom. It tells you how it's basically going to interact with other atoms. So if I have one atom of fluorine and one atom of lithium right next to each other, only the outside of those atoms kind of get to communicate with each other. We'll get into more of the details when we get to bonding, but for now, I just need you to know that the valence is the true personality and it tells you how it's going to bond. Okay. Very last, we have the definition of an atom. This is our picture in its totality. The atom is the smallest particle of an element. So if I had a chunk of lithium and I cut it over and over and over and over and over, like Democritus said, I would come down to something like this. My 3 protons, my neutrons separating them, my orbitals with my electrons in there, and then my outermost orbital called my valence shell or valence orbital, valence ring, valence cloud, whatever you'd like to call it, and my lone valence electron, the ones on the outside. Atoms make up all of matter, whether it is the air that you are breathing, the chair that you are sitting on, the screen you are watching this on, or you are made of matter, and that makes you made out of atoms. That's everything I have for you. If anything comes up, a misunderstanding, I would rewatch the video, reach out to me. I love answering your questions.